Robert Grinnell, KD7WNV, has been active in supporting public service events soon after becoming licensed in 2003. He soon joined the Mike and Key Amateur Radio Club, in which he currently remains a member, having served as its secretary, president, and chairman of its public service committee. For a number of years, he was active as the ESCARA, that's the Emergency Services Coordinating Agency, the RACES organization there, as training officer. That Emergency Services Coordinating Agency served cities in South Snohomish County and North King County until it was disbanded in 2015. He later joined the Snohomish County ACS and also helped to form the core of their RACES unit for the newly established NEMCO. That's the North Shore Emergency Management Coalition, where he continues as a member of its leadership team. Robert has taught numerous licensing classes for both ESCA and NEMCO. Robert currently holds an amateur radio extra class license. I mentioned Robert being the chairman of the Mike and Key Club's Public Service Committee. In that role, he is responsible for publishing the annual K7 LED information booklet that many of us pick up during the club's annual Puyallup Swap Meet. Notably, in 2016, Robert received the Mike and Key Pop Brown Award, which is the club's highest honor. In addition to Mike and Key, he is also a member of the Western Washington DX Club and the Edmonds Woodway Amateur Radio Club. I've heard of the amazing and arduous Bigfoot event for a number of years. Robert has been the coordinator for the ham radio teams in that event. Robert's talk on ham support for Bigfoot 200, the Bigfoot 200 endurance race, should be very fascinating and inspiring. It's all yours, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Are you seeing my title slide okay?
Nicely.
Looks great.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and we're going to talk about the Bigfoot, the radio support for the Bigfoot 200, and this is a public service event, and it has some relation to emergency communications, and that's practice for emergency communications, and we'll have some lessons that I think are applicable that we've drawn from this event towards the end of the presentation that are applicable to emergency communications. So we'll try to keep it relevant here. I believe that the Bigfoot 200 is the most challenging public service event in Western Washington. That's not an official title that anyone has bestowed, but nobody's challenged successfully for it yet. So, and I think it's about as close as you'll get to an emergency activation experience without the inconvenience of having an actual disaster. So it provides very good experience for preparation for emergency communications. Why do the Bigfoot? If you like field day style radio operation, if you like camping in the Cascades, if you're committed to emergency communication, certainly a lot of us are here, but your exercises don't really pose the conditions and the challenges that an actual disaster deployment would. You have a lot of field and emergency radio and support gear that you'd like to make more use of. And do you want to try practicing digital modes as part of your communications, or trying some different bands and methods like 6 meters or NVIS over HF that aren't typically employed for public service events? We've dabbled in all of those things, and we definitely use digital with WinLink. So here's what we're going to do today. I've got a 5-minute video that I'm going to show you. Jason Martin, who is one of our new hams with Bigfoot this past year, did both the shorter events in July and then the 200 with us in August, was so taken that he offered to put together a video afterward and collected photos and video snippets from the hams and did a great job. And that's on YouTube, and I'm going to show it as kind of an introduction here. Well, then we'll go over what the Bigfoot event entails. We'll talk about the communications, support structure, and operations. Then we'll go back through some of the history of how we got here. It's an interesting story. It has some other lessons along the way, a lot of lessons for operating public service events and organizing them. And then finally, lessons and takeaways.
A great test of a ham's capabilities. Unlike the cozy Radio Shack with its central heating and utility power, operating deep in the forest and circling the blast zone of Mount St. Helens will exercise all aspects of radio communications and preparations. The Bigfoot is an endurance race. Hardy runners take 50 to 100 hours to complete the 200-mile course through dense forest, rocky terrain, running streams, while dodging fallen trees and tumbled rocks along the way. Exhaustion, heat, cold, and losing the trail are all braved by the runners. Aid stations support the runners along the route. The runners stop at these waypoints for light medical care, food, water, and to pick up their cached gear. Cellular access is all but non-existent along the route. Ham radio operators set up operations alongside the aid stations to fill in the communications gap. These ham stations allow concerned family and crew to inquire about the progress of their loved one. A runner that is too exhausted or injured may rest while hams pass a message about the runner's status, and then the runner support crew is summoned to recover them.
Bigfoot Base, this is Medic 3.
Oh, Medic 3, go.
We're about 3/4 of a mile from the aid station. He is not having a stroke.
Aid station shortages of food, water, or medical supplies are reported by hams, so additional provisions can be sent. In more dramatic moments, a runner may be injured on the trail or become so exhausted that they lose their situational awareness and wander off the wilderness trail completely. In these cases, radio operators remotely guide the medic units to the runner's last known location.
It's hard to tell, but I think I see footprints.
Priority traffic. Go ahead, Court. I have 2 aid station workers here who hunt and know the area if you want a resource.
Okay, Medic 1 copies. We're going to start heading north-northeast of our location. If you could blow your whistle about every 30 seconds or so, and we'll do the same. And we'll meet up. You've got a winner here. All right, we have found him. NA7Q.
That's a found runner. Roger, roger.
Roger, roger. Runner in the town.
In dire circumstances, operators might even coordinate a helicopter rescue.
A rest station received information that there was a runner sick on the trail and he could not proceed. The medic was at our aid station and he was going to go find the runner. I gave the medic one of our ham radios and instructions how to use it. He found the runner, and the runner could not be moved and could not be transported with a conventional stretcher system. Race headquarters went to the process of getting search and rescue to summon a helicopter, and ultimately an Army helicopter lowered a stretcher through the trees to retrieve the runner. It was a happy ending for everyone, and especially a good use of amateur radio.
Operating far from facilities in most cases, the radio operator's self-sufficiency under adverse circumstances is tested.
Runners out on the trail had to drop to the ground because of the lightning.
Ham teams consist of 2 or more operators for each location.
We've had several supplies delivered. 280 amp hour battery is, we haven't found the bottom of that yet. In fact, it hasn't even gone below 13 volts.
Weather and geography will test the operator's ability to enable communications. HF is used to pass aid station status information digitally using WinLink. The Bigfoot 200. stretching the skills and adaptability of hams, proving the human impact of amateur radio.
It's just a great privilege to be part of something that contributes to runner safety.
Okay. On to Bigfoot event information itself. Some of this you'll have already heard in the video. Quick facts about the run. It's actually, at least this year, it's going to be 209 miles, a trail run with over 46,000 feet of ascent. It's located in Mount St. Helens National Monument and Gifford Pinchot National Forest. Starts on the south side of St. Helens and goes up to the town of Randall, doing kind of a big backwards-esque course through the forest and the monument. It is the longest point-to-point trail run in the U.S. It runs 5 days and 4 nights, Friday through Tuesday, always around or on the second weekend of August, the Friday through Tuesday surrounding that. It's operated by a small company called Destination Trail and was first conducted in 2015. It's part of what they call the Triple Crown of 200s. They have a run down in Tahoe, which is actually the oldest of the three, is now in mid-June. It used to be in September. And then the Moab 240, which of course is longer, but these are both loop courses. So that's why this is the longest point-to-point trail run. And that's in Moab in October. We usually have some associated shorter events. And this past year, the Hams started calling these events the Little Feet runs. Some years they're held on a separate weekend. That was the case last year. We had 3 events on a weekend in July. 73-mile loop around the mountain with some side trips, a straight loop around the mountain, and then a loop just on the south side of the mountain. This year, the shorter events are going to be concurrent with the 200, held on Friday and Saturday of that weekend in August. And we will just have the 40-mile loop around St. Helens and the 20-mile loop on the south side. We have 14 aid stations along the course. The stations open and close on a staggered schedule as the runners move through the course. Stations operate, once they're in service, they operate around the clock, and we'll see a graphic representation of their schedule in just a moment. Apart from the Hams, the stations are staffed by volunteers. They provide food and beverage to the runners and first aid and other types of care, massages and so forth. Each station has an enforced cutoff time. The runners have to make each station by a certain time or they are disqualified out of the run. It works out that the pace for that is about 2 miles an hour overall, which doesn't sound terribly difficult, but of course, when you're running 200 miles at 2 miles an hour, it's something else, especially when you got to fit sleep into that. Certain stations are designated as sleep stations and have facility for that. They impose a 5-hour limit unless there's no one else needing the cot, so to speak, then you can stay longer. But generally the runners, especially the faster ones, sleep considerably less than that. It is truly amazing what these athletes can endure. The runners can have drop bags waiting at most of the stations to provide them with their own gear. And sometimes at some of the stations, those bags will be transported forward to certain other stations. And they can also have a personal support crew meet them at most of the stations, and quite a few do. And so they have these crew, these friends or family members driving around from station to station, meeting them or waiting for them at each station to help them recuperate and get ready for the next leg of the trip. You won't be able to read this very well, but it is just a graphical representation of the aid station schedule. You can see how the early stations operate for a few hours, and then as we go forth and the runners spread out, each station operates a longer and longer period of time. One of the challenges we have is that we have about by midday Saturday, you would think it's balanced out along the 5 days, but because of the way this works, by midday Saturday, we already have had 9 or 10 aid stations activated. So we have to work out the staffing for that accordingly. And then that dark line along the bottom is the headquarters at Finish, which operates around the clock day and night for 5 days and 4 nights continuously. We've got to be on the air all the time in case of something coming up. The communications support. So we have hams formed into teams. Typically, we try to get at least 3 on a team. The more hams we have, of course, the more we can have per team. The hams provide communications linking the aid stations with headquarters and with each other. You don't have to be there for the whole 5 days. You can do as little as 1 day, but it's a long drive for most of us to get down there. So you probably want to do more than that. Generally speaking, we have quite a few hams that are there for the full duration. And then we have others that are typically there maybe Friday through Sunday and generally staff the middle stations. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how that works out with the redeployments in a moment. The station locations range from parking lots with paved road access in some facilities to more primitive and wilderness sites with what we would call secondary Forest Service gravel roads. Some of the stations can accommodate RVs. Those are all pretty much in the first half of the course as it happens. We don't need 4-wheel drive for any of the sites, but high clearance is recommended for a couple of them. And the way we work the staffing is that teams from the first 4 or 5 stations, which you saw a moment ago, just operate for a few hours Friday and Saturday, then redeploy to the last 4 or 5 stations to staff them for the remainder of the event. And that's how we managed to cover all the stations with the more limited number of hams that we have. Radio operations are, we have a VHF, UHF, FM phone net that operates on 2 linked repeaters in the area. Of course, that handles all of our emergency, ad hoc, traffic, runner welfare, inquiries, logistics, supplies, requests, and so forth. All of the aid stations are able to reach at least one of the repeaters. Some are able to reach both. And we do some FM simplex with stations that have a direct path with headquarters at the Finish. Then one of the things that makes this event unique is that runner in and out times are recorded at each station, and those are transmitted to headquarters in batches via WinLink. Most of the time that's done via external gateways on HF, which means, as you may have seen in the video, a lot of the stations had HF radios in them. And so they have an HF setup to be able to reach out to the WinLink gateways and pass that traffic. And then we're able to pull that down and aggregate it at Finish. We do some peer-to-peer with stations that have a direct path to headquarters. And we have also experimented with 6 meters and HF and VIS. We don't rely on either of those at this point because we do have the repeaters, but we like to dabble in those just to keep them as options if we need them in the future. There's a sample of the runner data very quickly. It can be passed in plain text with comma separation or tab delimitation or even just space delimiters. This is what it looks like when we put it in a spreadsheet. But we're passing the bib number, an action, in, out, drop, dropping out of the race, a time and a date, and then a station abbreviation. For example, EP is Elk Pass and SB is Spencer Butte. Volunteering for communications, we need operators. The biggest issue with any of these events is always operators. Any other problem, equipment, logistics can be solved if we have enough operators. So we do need operators regardless of how much personal radio equipment they have. If if you have no radio equipment, we can still use them as operators because we do put them into teams. Having a great amount of equipment is helpful, but not required. And what we do is we match up the hams and assemble teams based on who has what in order to form the fully operational station teams. We do have some assignments available at Finish and Randall, and there are motels available there for a nice, comfy lifestyle. We can also accommodate RVs there. But other than that, basically the two main requirements of hams are you need to be able to camp in the mountains relatively self-sufficiently, and you need to be able to get there, which means you need to be comfortable driving on forest and mountain roads. And we do take your vehicle type and your level of comfort, your driving comfort into account in making your assignments. And in that case, then if you have some limitations, schedule flexibility helps. Formation of ham teams. So I just mentioned schedule. Of course, schedule and availability is a primary factor, and then the vehicle type and level of driving comfort. I survey all of the hams for their equipment across several aspects, and these are all factored together to make sure that each team has all the elements they need for a complete station. So we match up complementary hams with complementary equipment and so forth. Someone might be bringing the dual band station. Someone else might be bringing the HF station. Someone else might be bringing the shelter for the station. But we need all of these elements: power, the dual band FM station, HF WinLink. VHF WinLink is not so critical, but it is used for the peer-to-peer. And of course, we need masts and supports for the antennas, shelter for the station, and tables and chairs. And then, of course, hams provide their own shelter, either tent or RV, or sleep in their vehicle, whatever they care to do for their own shelter. How we got here. So there's some interesting aspects to this that I'll just cover. I'm going to breeze through a lot of these slides, but they'll be in the PowerPoint if you want to look at them longer later on. It's funny how things happen. I had no familiarity with this area down around St. Helens prior to 2009. In 2009, I got to help with the Ride Around Washington bike ride. Was a week-long bike ride. And that was managed by Gene and Fran Underwood. Some of you who have been involved in public service and other things in the area for a long time will have known them. They managed that ride. And that year happened to be a volcanoes loop. And it started in Packwood and did a loop down through Gifford Pinchot National Forest, across back around Mount Adams and back up by Rainier and so forth. So we tied together 3 mountains in a loop. And that was my first exposure to the area. I bring this up because if it hadn't been for that, I probably never would have touched doing the Bigfoot or organizing the Bigfoot, because I would have had no knowledge of the area. After that, I realized that that area, particularly Skamania County, which is where Gifford Pinchot National Forest is basically, is a rare county in the Salmon Run, the Washington State CUSO Party. And I started scouting sites to operate the Salmon Run from down there. And I did that in 2010 with some ham friends, and so gained a greater familiarity with the area that way. Didn't do anything else down there. And then in 2015, this email arrived. This came into the Mike and Key. Not quite sure in what capacity he got it, but it came to Jim Monson, who is now the King County EC, some of you will know. And he forwarded it onto the board, and as public service chairman, I got a copy. And this was the initial request from the Destination Trail folks asking for ham radio support for this event. So I took a look at this. Jim said, "This looks interesting." I'm going, "Yeah, this looks interesting, boy. What is this thing?" So you can't see it real well, but that's the full 200 course. That's St. Helens on the lower right, Mount Adams on the lower left, and Randall is at the top center. The town of Randall is the top center. So I start looking at this. This is the course more in context. That's the state highway map. You can see Portland and Vancouver down at the lower left, Centralia and Chehalis at the upper left. The little dots, yellow dots, are all of the aid stations scattered through the forest there. So it gives you a sense of how big that course is. My initial impressions, which actually were inaccurate in some ways, but scary enough, and this is true, if you kind of put a rubber band around the course, it covers over 700 square miles or encompasses 700 square miles. There's the 14 aid stations. When I first looked at them, it looked like they were all at the end of four-wheel drive tracks. That's not the case at all, but that's what it looked like initially. And I couldn't find any repeaters inside the course. The nearest repeater appeared to be north of the town of Randall. So it didn't look real promising. I thought, okay, we need like 50 hams out there for 5 days. How am I going to get that? They all need four-wheel drive vehicles. We're going to need field stations with power. We're going to be dry camping in the backwoods. And can we even communicate amongst these sites that are in among all this, difficult terrain in the St. Helens area? Without repeaters, we'd have to do simplex of some type. So I did respond to them, and so did two others, Lee Chambers of the Olympia Amateur Radio Society and Dave Williamson of Snohomish County Hams. And then Destination Trail got us together. Now, I didn't mention it before, that email came out a couple weeks before Field Day in 2015. And so they got us together, and this is this is mid-June. The event is going to be in about 2 months in August, and we've never done it before. So we started talking. We had in the pre-COVID, pre-Zoom world, we did emails and conference phone calls. We had lots of questions and concerns. We were all focused on Field Day with it coming up in a couple of weeks. We didn't see any chance of pulling together the size of the ham crew needed, especially covering 5 days instead of just 1 or 2 on a weekend. No idea how we could communicate successfully. And ultimately, we decided we could not commit to helping them with the 200. It was just too short notice. But they were going to have another event later that year in October called the Bigfoot 120, 120-mile run. And we said we would come back after Field Day and examine that. They went ahead and did the 200. They did not have any ham communications. They used satellite phones. They reported having numerous difficulties with that. And of course, satellite phones are expensive too. The runners who were there, who have been at subsequent Bigfoots, have expressed great gratitude and comfort now having reliable ham communications instead of what they experienced with the satellite phones that year. After Field Day in August, I had been talking about the event with members of the groups that I was in, the Escaraces and the Mike and Key Club. I talked with Dave and Lee. They did ultimately bow out of organizing, but they continued to help in recruiting hams, which was really critical in gathering enough hams. And we've had strong contingents from those areas ever since, especially the Thurston County Olympia guys have been tremendous. And so I took it on and began trying to figure out how we would communicate between the sites. And to do that, I started doing radio coverage modeling on the computer. So this is what the 120 course was. And this is basically just the southern part of the 200 course, but they're critically, as we'll learn in a few minutes, at least in terms of what happened, they're running it in reverse. So they're starting over here on the right in the forest and running towards St. Helens and finishing on the south side of St. Helens over on the left, bottom left, where they would normally start the 200. And that's the is the course in context again on the state highway map with the start over at the right and the finish is one of those purple dots in the lower left. So in talking with Dave and Lee, they said, well, are we not kind of in the same position as before? But fortunately, there were mitigating factors for that. There were fewer aid stations, just 8 instead of 14, so we didn't need as many hams. Shorter duration, Friday night through Sunday, so basically a 3-day weekend instead of 5 days. So that critically reduced the number of hams that we needed the first time out. By then I had a list of 16 other interested hams, and the radio coverage computer modeling did show that simplex communications should be possible, though we would need some relays. That modeling was a very interesting experience. It's the first time I had done anything like it. I found this website. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, but it was very useful. I modeled out simplex paths using 2 meters and 6 meters among the various aid station sites for the 120. Had to do a bit of research to figure out how to use the computer modeling properly. It used something called the Longley-Rice model. And the results showed that one of the locations would serve pretty well as a likely relay site. That location is what we call Wright Meadow. Here is a grid of what I concluded with the modeling. These are predicted S unit signal strength paths between the various stations. And this is this shows that mapped out with the Wright Meadow is in the center there. It's actually labeled as Road 9327, which is its alter ego name, but we call it Wright Meadow. And you can see the heavy red lines that go to it. Actually, there's a site more centrally located over to the left, Windy Pass Aid, if you can read it. However, that was a hike-in site that's no longer used. We don't have hike-in sites anymore. We use the Windy Ridge viewpoint, which is road accessible, of course. But that would, being a hike-in site, that would not serve as a relay point. And more critically, also, the relay had to be able to talk to finish, which is at the lower left. And so Wright Meadow was the logical relay point. But the computer modeling was not enough to be sure of this, so we needed to go down and see if we could actually do it. And I put together a field test with a group of hams. We went down and went to the different sites and talked to each other. And basically, it confirmed that we could talk in pretty much the way the modeling suggested. There were some challenges, but there were going to be some challenges, but it was manageable with just simplex and relays. Here are some pictures from that field test. This is Bill at the Coldwater Lake site, Adam at Johnston Ridge. You can see it is sort of fog bound there. Dan with me at Wright Meadow. And then we have the field test results that we put together, and that's the grid. And here's what they look like on the map, and basically confirmed the computer modeling in terms of fundamental ability to talk among the sites that we expected to be able to. So then we went and did the 120 that October. We had 18 hams plus 1 non-ham. And we staffed 7 aid stations plus finish. I put myself at the relay point rather than finish. That's the only time I've ever done that since then. Decided that I need to be at finish at HQ. But it did work out okay. And I had a very experienced crew at finish, so they performed admirably. The thing about this, you'll see that grid at the bottom is what the weather forecast was beforehand. That wasn't entirely accurate. So what happened, bearing in mind that this is, well, it's October, what happened is this, something called Hurricane Oho came by. That's a picture of it on the left and its track on the right. Now, it looks like it's well offshore there, but it was big enough that it made its presence felt. In fact, what happened was that came by and it hit Saturday morning. And remember, I mentioned earlier, the runners were going reverse course. So they were starting in the forest and then they were coming out into the barren blast zone of St. Helens Saturday morning. They had started Friday night, and the storm hit them at the same time. It was very cold, very windy, very rainy. The did not finish rate climbed to 70%. It's the highest did not finish rate I've ever seen in a public service event. Saturday afternoon, we had a group turn back to the Norway Pass aid station location after it had closed and been cleared. And we had to deal with that as an emergency situation. We found out about it from other runners and sent vehicles up there to get them. I had visions of them huddled in the rain and the wind. Fortunately, Norway Pass is a significant trailhead location, and it had an outbuilding that they were able to take shelter in, so they did okay. And but that was our first emergency response connected with Bigfoot, and there have been a number. The wind was so severe that we had several tents and canopies at various sites destroyed. And we had a significant need for transportation of all of the runners that were dropping out. One of the curious lessons we took from that was we had a change in the signal quality as time went on, particularly Saturday as we moved from day into the evening. Seemed to be affected by the weather. And that was a new one to me, that FM, VHF transmissions could be affected by the weather, but they definitely can. That's a picture of the finish at the Burnable Mountain Snow Park. It's a little bit wet, but a very good team there, carried on admirably. There's the station setup. This is before we were doing WinLink, so this was only VHF 2-meter FM communications. There's the Norway Pass location when it was staffed. There's the Windy Pass hike-in, and that's what you have is a tent. And they were huddled in that tent. The tent did survive, and that was very fortunate for them. That's out in the barren blast zone, so they had no other cover. So having done the 120, we came back in 2016, and as a result of some of my recruiting efforts down in that area, I was notified by someone of a repeater, and actually a pair of repeaters that are linked, one of them being one of the AB7F repeaters, which is the repeater listed as being in Randall. It turns out it's actually better located for us than I thought it was. It's actually fairly centrally located in the northern curve of the 200 course. And then it's linked with a repeater farther south, which forms a nice axis right through the course, sort of like the vertical bar of a $sign running through the S of the $sign. But we did need to find out how well we could now communicate with those repeaters. So we did another field test, got more hams to go down, and did a similar test, but now with the repeaters in addition to some simplex pads, and confirmed that we would be able to communicate with them. We did identify a couple of challenges. Coldwater Lake, which is down in a lake valley, has a difficulty reaching the repeaters. And also there was kind of a local geography problem at the Klickitat aid station. And we've addressed those most of the time with crossband repeaters. Coldwater, we operate a crossband repeater at the nearby Johnston Ridge site, and Klickitat, then actually the same people end up usually doing this, then they're over at Klickitat and they set up the crossband repeater about a half mile away from the actual aid station and operate through that. with handhelds from the actual aid station site. There's the Lewis River site and a view from the road near Klickitat and Coldwater Lake. So then we actually came up to the 200. So this was our first time doing the full 200 in August of 2016. We had 25 hams. We managed to cover all the stations by doing mid-event redeployments from the early stations to the later ones, and that continues to be a standard aspect of how we are able to cover all of the stations. At that point, we were passing all of the traffic by voice over the repeaters primarily. And as I talked about, Johnston Ridge did a crossband repeater for Coldwater, and then Klickitat also set up crossband. There's the Chain of Lakes aid station. And Johnston Ridge, this is at the Johnston Ridge Observatory, which is one of the primary tourist destinations for St. Helens. There's your view of St. Helens from that observatory, that parking lot. And here's Klickitat. This is not the aid station itself. This is the crossband repeater site up the road from the aid station. And there's Dave Lima operating on a handheld from the actual aid station up through the crossband repeater. That's the wider view of the Klickitat aid station, the actual aid station location. And the radio setup, I think, again, this is back up at the crossband repeater site. Spencer Butte. And Wright Meadow again. The station set up at Wright Meadow. Okay, moving on, the following year, that fall after the 200, they were doing the 120 again, and we had 18 hams, and we continued to do all of the traffic by voice, had a crossband repeater, again for Coldwater Lake, and it rained again. And it wasn't a hurricane, but it was enough rain and wind. I remember I was operating at Finish down at the snow park at Marble Mountain, and we were stationed under the awning of my RV. So we're outside in the parking lot under the awning. And I remember looking down, and it's a paved parking lot, and there was just a sheet of water moving down the parking lot. It was like being in a very shallow lake. It was raining so much. And after that, Destination Trail gave up on doing October events in the Southern Cascades. So we don't do the 120 in October anymore. There's Norway Pass. And I got Jim to come out and do one of them, Jim Monson, the guy who forwarded the original email. And he was at Norway. Then in the following year, we had a couple of shorter events on a separate weekend. And at that event in July of 2017, we introduced the use of WinLink for passing the runner traffic. Not all of the stations did it, but it was the introduction of it. And we could tell it worked pretty well. So we expanded it from there. Then we came to the 200 that year. We expanded the use of WinLink for passing the runner data. Managed to do that by several stations. I think that was the year I was aware of there being 3 Pactor modems in the hands of hams in Western Washington, and we had all 3 of them at Bigfoot. So, and the Pactor modem helped a great deal back then compared with Winmore. In 2018, we had the three shorter events combined or concurrent with the 200. Having those puts an extra burden on the early aid stations. We need more hams. There's a heavier runner load. Fortunately, we had 39 hams come out. We still did redeployments. That was the first time we had complete adoption of WinLink for passing all of the runner traffic. And that year we had 6 Pactor modems, which is almost enough with redeployments to cover all of the aid stations, to have a Pactor modem at most of the aid stations. Most of the traffic, as is still the case, was passed through external gateways. We had a little bit of peer-to-peer with headquarters. And we found out that Coldwater Lake could get into the Randall repeater directly on its own if it had a Yagi. So you go on and learn. In recent years, we've had, in 2019, the 3 shorter events were again concurrent with the 200. And that year we had a huge, actually 2018 and 2019, we'll talk about this more in a moment. We had a huge thunderstorm come through. I think 2018 was Saturday night, 2019 was Friday night. The first one, 2018, I had internet at Randall at Finish, and I was watching this storm on the Doppler radar. And at one point, this thing had an arm touching Mount Hood. It had kind of a 3-spoke arm. It had one arm touching Mount Hood, one arm touching Ephrata, and one arm touching Shelton. It was so big. And it just rained lightning down on us. Same thing in 2019, and a big thunderstorm came through, and we had to react to that and deal with it. 2020 was canceled due to COVID. 2021, again, we did the Little Feet events in July. That worked out very well, went very smoothly. Had a great team there, and a lot of experienced hams in the team. Then come the 200, we had that heat wave, if you remember, in mid-August. Part of this is that that area gets its weather more from Portland than from Seattle. And we had 3 days over 100 degrees in Randall, and it didn't really start to cool down until the event was almost over, Monday night or Tuesday morning. And we also had, I think the first year we did the 200, we had a heat wave, and that Saturday, 2016, was over 100 degrees. Moving on. Okay, lessons and takeaways. We've had, of course, we've talked about the hurricane remnant and the heavy rains that we had to deal with. We have still had storms come through in August. Lightning has been the primary issue with them, but also rain can be significant with those, of course. What we've had to do with the lightning storms is basically everyone shuts down, disconnects, or moves away from their equipment, and those that can get into the repeater with a handheld continue communications that way. But safety is the priority there. So it does have a significant impact on radio operations. As I mentioned, 2 years we've had temperatures over 100 degrees, at least down in Randall. One of the things that we've become pretty adept at doing, as we've found the utility for it, is we are prepared with handy talkies. We don't use them a lot in our own communications, but fairly regularly now we can expect that a search party will need to be dispatched to find a lost runner at least once during the 200. And we've been able to, as I think the video talked about a little bit, we've been able to equip those people with a handy talkie, given that it is an emergency. Even though the person carrying it is not licensed, it is an emergency situation, and they've been able to communicate through the repeater. And this was critical, particularly in 2019, when we had a runner who was in distress up on an isolated ridge where there was no chance of getting a vehicle in. And that ultimately led to a helicopter airlift by a helicopter from the Army base in Yakima, near Yakima. And I'm happy to report the runner was fine. In fact, he got him to a hospital, and he recuperated fast enough that he was able to join us at the finish line for the final ceremony at the end of the event. Key takeaways. Lesson I learned in that very first 120, setting up gear and antennas in the wind, the rain, and the darkness, was that each of those factors can double the time and amount of trouble to do the setup. So it compounds. So it took me about 8 times as long to do what I could have done in nice conditions of daylight. So that's Robert's rule of doubling factors. Radio lessons. We found the use of directional antennas to be useful in some cases, either for, of course, increasing signal strength or more to the point, with some of the stations, minimizing multipath problems. Directing the signal in one direction avoids having signal bounce off the mountains so much. We have had multipath problems caused by the terrain. I talked earlier also about we've noticed the effect of weather on the signal quality, even on VHF, UHF, FM, which you don't find talked about that much, but we've definitely noticed the impact there from weather. I think the previous presenter mentioned this in connection with POTA. Signal quality can be very sensitive to a small relocation of your antenna. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're able to set up your antenna to where it can be moved a few feet, that can be very helpful. I just talked about having handy talkies ready to hand off to search and rescue units. Now, these are not organized, these are not official search and rescue units. They, of course, have their own communications. We're talking about typically destination trail staff who happen to be trail runners themselves, of course, typically are the ones going out on these early searches for lost runners. And also, this was critical in that very first hurricane situation, having hams able to go mobile when we had to go up and retrieve those runners from Norway Pass. We had one of our hams go with them in his own vehicle to maintain communications with us. Logistical lessons. Bigfoot is MCOM practice at its highest level. We do public service to be ready for emergencies. We practice and prepare at home to be ready for public service. And if you don't have it working before you leave, if you're thinking, I'll get it fixed up in the field or whatever, the odds are against you. Get it figured out at home and have it all settled before you go out in the field. That's one of the key lessons taken away from this. Similarly, pre-planning your go kit and your communications kit and personal kits is vital. Having your gear ready to deploy in a way that is as easy as possible to deploy just helps tremendously when you're out there, especially in any kind of adverse condition. You must be prepared for all kinds of weather. Even in a heat wave, the nights can feel very cold. You drop from 100 degrees to 60 degrees at night, and especially if there's a little breeze, all of a sudden you're chilled. Adaptability and perseverance. You've got to perform and maintain the communications in less than perfect conditions. Rain and wind, lightning, heat waves, lack of sleep. Conversely, in terms of your go kit and other gear, you need to learn what you don't need to bring. And a list is your best friend, a carefully considered list. Mental and personality lessons. This is possibly the biggest one and one of the great experiences you get out of Bigfoot is it requires teamwork and cooperation with strangers. You're being put together with other hams in a team that has to set up a station where quite often you're each bringing different parts of the station that you have to all fit together into a working whole. You're also working with other volunteers at the aid station sites. So really requires you to, and that's exactly what you'll have in an emergency deployment. You're going to be working with strangers all over the place and need to be able to function and cooperate with them. Operators need to be nimble and decisive. You've got to be able to think on your feet. Your radio just dies. What do you do? How do you sort out the problem? What do you do in the meantime? Do you have an alternate communications means? I got to keep going here. Mental readiness. You may be in a fairly relaxed mode, and all of a sudden something happens, and you've got to shift into a high tempo, critical communication situation. Yet you've got to remain focused and calm. You got to pace yourselves. yourself to avoid getting exhausted or otherwise degraded in your performance. Try to maintain a good sleep schedule as much as possible with the around-the-clock operation that we have. Eat and drink regularly and move around periodically to keep alert and keep the blood flowing. Spirit of self-sufficiency and problem solving will serve you well, and common sense is your best tool in your toolbox. If you're interested, you can find out more information about the event itself at the Destination Trail Run website. And to volunteer or just get on my master email list, you can drop me a note at KD7WNV@ARRL.net with the ARRL email forwarding. And the call for signups for this year's event will go out in May. Questions?
That was great, Robert. Thank you so much.
It's a mighty impressive public service event. Just amazing.
Yeah. Ran a little long, but if there's a question or two, we can handle it real fast.
Yeah, not a problem. I think, you know, you were very thorough. So I suspect that a lot of the questions that probably would have come up were already handled in what you showed us. But there are a few questions. So and we're going to have to go real fast with these, honestly. But can you comment on weather information support and whether you were able to get Doppler radar one way or another to keep track of you know, specific areas of precip and whatnot?
Yeah, well, we have internet at the high school at Finnish in Randall. So yes, we can get Doppler that way. Of course, if we've got a lightning storm and a station has had to go off the air and they're not able to communicate with us via handhelds, we can't get information to them. But yes, we are able to, at headquarters, we're able to monitor storms that way and advise stations that are still on the network.
Do you use any race tracker form in WinLink for your ins, outs, and drops?
We have one that's being developed. The format is really pretty simple, and we're pretty flexible. And again, in terms of the delimiters, it can be done in plain text with even just a space delimiter between the 5 data elements. But yes, actually one of our hams, John Rumsey, has been, actually a few of them, and John's been working on it most recently, started developing a form to tie into WinLink for those that want to use it.
Do the race committee use any of the information for placement, award placement?
Not award placement. All awards are determined by, you know, when you finish. So they're right there when you finish. It's a big deal. Even when everyone finishes, it's a big deal. They ring bells and people come out and cheer and everything, even in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning. So yeah, so they're well aware when everyone finishes in terms of awards.
Thank you.
Something I'll mention that is actually a common question is about food. So all of the aid stations are preparing food, and the question is often, can the hams eat the food? And the answer is yes, but we do encourage hams to bring their own food, especially if they have any special needs, but also because aid stations aren't always in operation. They go through a setup and a takedown, and plus we do redeployments, so sometimes you're between aid stations. So there's times when you may need to eat that you won't have the aid station in operation to provide food.
I can't imagine running in during fires and smoke. You mentioned about the hot weather. Did you have issues with fire and smoke as well?
Generally, we haven't. There was one year, I think it was it 2019 or 2020? And 2020 was canceled. There was one year when there was a forest fire in the area that was of some concern in advance, but it ultimately didn't cause us much problem. I guess last year, actually, I do remember a little bit of haze from forest fires, but it was the haze that we were all getting in Western Washington from the forest fires. It wasn't anything local to the event.
Couple of equipment and technology related questions, and we're going to have to, we only have time for really a couple more so we can stay on schedule here. But was there any use of APRS? And then did you find that any particular radio brands were more reliable than others? We
don't really use APRS because we're not, we don't have units in motion that we need to worry about tracking the location. I will mention the runners actually, for the 200, they actually do carry a spot tracker, which can be monitored on the internet. Originally they didn't, and that's why we've always been passing the runner data. And the trackers have some issues, particularly in the forest. So that's why we've continued to pass the runner data. So the trackers are about as close as it gets to APRS, but that's not our system. That's provided by a commercial vendor. Yeah, it's not like a bike ride where we have mobile units that we want to keep track of. So we don't really need APRS. What was the second part? Brands of radios.
Reliability of any particular brand of radios. This is not going to be an endorsement.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that we've reached any great conclusions on that. Obviously, the hams are supplying their own gear. It's what they're experienced with and what they're comfortable with. I will say, most of the time we're using major Japanese vendor Kenwood, ICOM, Yaesu radios for most of this, certainly.
Sure.
And because of the repeaters, and 2 meters, it's strictly 2 meter FM, no single sideband.
Yeah, at this point, yeah, because we're able to use the repeaters, it's all VHF, UHF, FM for the voice traffic, and then HF for the wind link, but that's not sideband, of course. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, it is kind of, but yes, for voice traffic, it's all FM.
Fascinating stuff, and I think you've probably got a lot of people interested in potentially joining down the road. So hopefully this gets you some new recruits. Robert, thank you so much for that presentation. That was fascinating, and I'm certainly hoping on a personal level that I'll be able to volunteer for this one of these years, if not this coming year. It really looks like a great experience.